You've never seen it?
I've never seen it.
Oh, my. So, Colin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Previously, on our first entry into End of an Era films, we took a look at Whit Stillman's Metropolitan, a 1990s film about a dying culture in New York City in the run-up to the 1980s, which is a decade marked by great change here in the United States of America. Today's film holds many similarities to Metropolitan. It was made in the 1990s, and follows the decline of a once dominant cultural scene in New York City in the very early days of the 1980s. Where this film differs a bit is that it further connects to the topic of end of an era, where Metropolitan acted as the beginning of Stillman's career, launching him into a project that he actually really wanted to do. This acts as the film that basically killed this director's career, more or less.
Editor Colin, back at it again. Just wanted to clarify after making sure of something with Tony, after doing a little bit of my own research. He meant to say it killed his career for the time being, but Whit Stillman did in fact make 2 more films after this. It just took a little over a decade for him to be able to make some more films. So just wanted to clarify that before the demons could enter the comments section.
Colin, this isn't a blockbuster by any chance, but do you have any idea what it might be? Any guesses on what it might be about, even?
That is a very vague description.
I'll give you a hint. It has something in common with one of your favorite fucking films. It's 1980s, sort of.
I mean, Brazil.
What a heavy load Einstein must have had. Fucking morons everywhere.
I don't know. That's 80s. So
Okay.
on my favorite movie, like my top 4 favorite at least, Brazil is the only one that falls in the 80s. So I am unsure. Like what you're describing describes a lot of auteur filmmakers getting right out of the 70s. There were a lot of people who had the freedom that they wanted in the 70s that getting into the 80s,
Yeah.
like was kind of torn away from them because
Well,
Reagan.
It's made in the 90s about a cultural movement that sort of died in the very early 80s.
That's my point. Is
Yeah.
like it's sort of like you had a lot of these people that like I said, it's like they died in the 80s and were sort of like clawing their way out. The 90s was the era of sort of like forward trajectory on like young indie filmmakers. You know, you had people like Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino, Kevin Smith, Richard Linklater. All these people came out of the 90s because that was the new counterculture.
Well, why don't we just break on into this and see if your inclinations are right? Just see what the movie is for today.
Okay.
Let's get in time on.
No, you. I feel like this is a Criterion case. All right, another Whit Stillman film.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. So, The Last Days of Disco. This is a very funny coincidence because friend of the show, Spencer.
All right. Oh, okay.
Yeah. When I was talking with him about the last movie you showed me,
Oh, yeah.
was talking about how Twitter recently had become enthralled with this movie.
I'm not on Twitter.
Neither am I. I haven't used Twitter in several years, but he still is on Twitter. And he was talking, well, no, he deleted Twitter recently. But anyways, the point being, Twitter had like recently in the past like few months had become enthralled with this movie. Someone he knows had become enthralled with this. This is like their favorite film of all time, which is where he knew the name Whit Stillman from.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's great.
So this has like a big like cult following at the moment, so I'm interested, and I would assume, like with Saturday Night Fever, this has really nothing to actually much do with disco.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah. Thematically, the disco is a stand-in for something else, much like Metropolitan. The debutante balls were not actually.
Yeah, no, it's just the backdrop for like our story and our main character sort of thing. Today's film is 1998 with Stillman Peace, Last Days of Disco. Stillman has, at this point, gained a bit of like much needed experience working on specifically like Metropolitan. He's like through failures has figured out a lot more about this film and filming in particular, right?
Yeah.
He has at this point amassed enough capital to afford like shooting on big lavish like sets, big like actual locations. He's got obviously the money to do actual soundtracks like that fits the thing. He got actual disco songs, so that's fun. He has brought with him a lot of the cast and crew from previous stuff that he's done, especially a couple people from Metropolitan. A couple of them are just like side characters to show up for a bit, but you know, a lot of the cast and crew did move on forward. Cinematography by John Thomas, and music by one of our guys, Mark Suozo. So anything that's not just licensed piece he did. Yeah. Chris Eigman returns to play to play up the full of himself prick jerk ass role. You'll remember him as Nick Smith from Metropolitan. A new find for Stillman in Chloe Sevigny, who holds down the lead role as Alice in this one. Stillman came up with the conceit for this film sometime after wrapping up on Metropolitan, basically bridging the gap between that film and his further body of work. Unfortunately, Last Days of Disco would bomb at the box office. It cost more than everything else that he had done up until this point, at $8 million to make, and it didn't even make back half of that. I think it made like $3 million back.
In the 90s, that tracks well. A lot of the independent films that were like huge came out in the 90s. They were, as I said, of people such as Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, Clerks. So if it was like relating to the culture, you had something like Clerks where it was a bunch of countercultural kids. Or if it was like Reservoir Dogs or something like El Mariachi, it was these kind of like high concept action films on a much lower budget. This, I would imagine, is like a character drama about, as the title says, The Last Days of Disco, something that kids, when this come out, cannot relate to in the fucking slightest.
Oh, yeah. Colin, any hopes or expectations or anything going into this film? I guess we already got into that with the Twitter whole thing.
No, I would hope it's good. I don't know. I think disco is always an important and interesting time to explore within American history. It was kind of this very brief flash in the pan that came and went real quick, and I think Saturday Night Fever kind of just embodies that whole mindset. That movie was made at like the perfect time. I mean, even we watched I Showed You Everybody Wants Some for the first time, and that movie has like a couple scenes at a discotheque, which it's 1980. It's in fucking it's in Texas, and all this kind of stuff. And there's like different clubs within the town. I think it is like a very large cultural moment that in the footnote of America kind of got left at this, I don't know, it's like a parody of itself almost. So I'm interested to see the cultural representation of how this turns out, and the culture of people within the people within this film.
Without any further delay, why don't you all jump back in time with us to the Last Days of Disco.
This ain't no dog day afternoon, motherfucker. I don't know what that means.
So, Colin, do you want to bring us through a plot synopsis on Whit Stillman's The Last Days of Disco?
While Metropolitan at its time would sort of be more comparable to the indie darlings of both its time and what was yet to come, sort of the normalizer of that point. To me, this very much comes off as something that directors like Paul Thomas Anderson would also be derivative of, which is Robert Altman.
Okay.
Robert Altman directed films like Nashville, which are movies about large groups of characters, all having sort of their own like quasi arcs, but all the characters are sort of saying something about the main theme of the movie that we're both trying to get across. And with this is a group of like a large group of characters, not necessarily as large as a Robert Altman film, closer to the scale of Metropolitan, but it's all kind of talking about this singular idea to me of what it is to grow up with people with various levels of maturity, whether that be emotional maturity and also levels of like corruption. You're following these people as they go through a nightlife throughout like the late 80s, and sort of their various like experiences with sexuality, experiences with drugs, experiences with all these like separate things, and their sort of inevitable end point. Who out of this group of people is going to change? Who out of this group of people is going to stay the same? And who out of the group of people is going to, like, age out of it?
Okay.
You know, you follow sort of a narc, you follow a person who is not at all sexually experienced, and then you follow a group of, like, sexually experienced people who are just sort of there to live that countercultural lifestyle, which to a more traditional person can come off as really shitty, but to them it's just, I'm just living life.
No. Oh, you're beautiful. You don't have to be some sweaty, horny, hetero he-ape to admire and appreciate female beauty.
Yeah, it's a large selection of characters, all of which are kind of going through their own fucking story, and they all just kind of convene and
I wouldn't call this plotless, but I also wouldn't exactly call it the most coherent movie to explain.
As far as like story goes, you kind of mentioned that Metropolitan has the same sort of thing, where it's a movie about a large group of people all with their own sort of things going on.
Yeah.
But Metropolitan, for the most part, all these characters kind of end up at the same place.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, it's kind of like hangout movies almost, that the plot doesn't really happen. It's more about just the group getting together and being, in that case, at the debutante ball or at these
Well, you never really see the debutante ball. Yeah, you see.
It's more about the after parties.
Yeah.
But this one, you really do follow characters in and out of the fucking nightclub. And how do you think that Whit Stillman did, like, in total? Like, do you think he accomplished it? Because he admits to having used Metropolitan as, like, a jumping off point for learning a lot of stuff. You know, he famously had to learn not to film a minute of just a static shot of a chair just for the final 5 seconds of, like, someone stepping in and giving off one last line.
I think Whit Stillman has improved a lot as a director, and while I would say it's always a shame when, like, a filmmaker cannot make something after this, but I do think it really does come to the point where, as an artist, it seems like he kind of had a thing he set out to say, almost in, like, a poetic sense, with Metropolitan. I would argue, from someone who liked the movie but did not love it, kind of said that, and I almost think, like, probably went through a career trying to say a lot of those similar things over and over and over again, and seemingly with this in its final form said what he had to say about counterculture, about human beings as people, about us as, like, messy creatures that aren't always coherent, and we don't always have, like, concise views that, like, make sense. We're not always necessarily the best people. I think this is the best possible version out of the two versions of Whit Stillman that I've seen.
Yeah,
saying what he has to say.
Yeah, no, and he's from interviews that I've seen of the guy, he doesn't really talk a lot about, like, his aspirations outside of the movie that he's immediately working on, and, like, the reminiscing on the past and actually making the movie, and more often than not spends his time talking about his amazing cast and crew and lifting them up, and sort of this I couldn't find even a vaguely vitriolic anything from the guy about like, you know, not losing, but failing out of or not being able to continue on with making films. You know? He seemed like he was content with what he made. He said that he made exactly the movie he wanted to make. And I think that the dude was very very grateful and all that sort of thing to even have made that sort of stuff.
He is not a studio guy, I would say. And from the outset with this, I guess one of the things I really want to say is just a positive is being close to your characters and having empathy for your characters is always, like, one thing. And I think empathy, as we discussed in a couple of our episodes now, empathy and sympathy are two things that oftentimes get, like, interchanged as identical when they're not. Like, you can be empathetic for your characters but also have a certain level of detachment. I feel like there's definitely a lot more detachment from his characters in this film than there ever was for Metropolitan. I don't get the feeling that Whit Stillman would like a lot of these people that he's writing.
Can you believe that? They really think that way. Disco sucks.
What a dope.
I feel like there's a lot more inherent bad traits among these people that he does not have some kind of, like, personal attachment to.
Which ultimately makes for better characters.
Yeah.
Like having flaws and things to work through.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
flaws, and like there's not one character in here that definitely feels like an insert of like, oh, he's a good person or whatever. Even the character who's not really in the movie all that much, that I would call the most fleshed out adult, ultimately is not necessarily the best person. This is sort of like one of our main characters, Alice. She seemingly wants to like feel like an adult.
Yeah.
You know, she maybe was raised a little more sheltered. She maybe is just trying to get things figured out. She doesn't want to be a virgin anymore, as we discover throughout the last thing, and doesn't necessarily know how to like socially interact in sort of these like mating rituals. But you know, take that as you will, whether or not that's like patriarchal or like whether or not that's a result of the patriarchy. Like she doesn't have any like social awareness on how to flirt or how to go with men, and the person she's getting advice off of is a narcissist. When she then proceeds to like have sex with this guy, whom seemingly they just have chemistry, like that's all it is. It's then kind of treated as this almost reveal in the moment where she talks about that like she's a virgin because she doesn't know how to like verbalize it, because it's both like a lack of knowledge of how to speak about these things and also just a general feeling of like discomfort talking about sex. You know, he's kind of a piece of shit for not having sex with her regardless how drunk they were with a condom, but then simultaneously I don't know if she has the capability to be emotionally mature enough to have these sorts of conversations, if that at all makes sense. Like there has to be a sort of sense of emotional and sexual maturity to understand the conversation of just like objective, yeah, no, we should have worn a condom.
Yeah.
This was not a good thing. Yes, I shittily gave you like a venereal disease. Now how do we move on from this, or how do we like objectively deal with this? It becomes like an emotional issue past that.
There's like layers of social awkwardness that they have to dig out one layer after another instead of being able to handle it all like adults.
Yeah.
And each time they do, it's a new, huge, terrible thing. Like, first he thinks that she's like deceiving him specifically only to like get sex, basically.
Yeah.
And to a degree, that's true. That is kind of what she did.
But whether or not she's consciously thinking that, like a lot of people doing terrible things, it's not necessarily something she's consciously being like, I'm deceiving this man. Because that's not typically how people think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then of course you got to dig up new layers. Well, now he's actually willing to accept me as a person and as an individual with intelligence, so on and so forth. Now she has to like dig into that sort of thing. She finds out that not only has he given her a venereal disease, he's also given her herpes, which like, how long did you know this? When were you going to tell me? So on and so forth. She gets at him by going out with Des or by flaunting Des in front of him, sort of thing. And he decides to, well, I'll just destroy the whole It's not really a decision, I guess.
But before that, it's like, you know, where you get back to like the emotional maturity thing. Yeah, he's harsh and he's kind of dickish about it. But earlier when like they're first having sex, and you know, he brings up this whole idea of like, it's like when you introduce the idea of casual sex, suddenly 40% of your IQ just goes out the window.
Yeah.
And that whole thing of earlier she gets told like, you know, you just need to tell guys that you think things that don't even make sense are just sexy or whatever. And then she's all like, yeah, no. Oh, Scrooge, like he collects Scrooge McDuck comics and everything. And she's like, Scrooge McDuck is so sexy.
Love Uncle Scrooge.
And he's like, you think so? Yeah, I love Uncle Scrooge. He's so sexy. And you just get this moment of him being like, you know, I didn't stop it at the point where you said Scrooge McDuck is sexy. Like, that's just stupid, ostensibly, because it is. But as he says, like, you're trying to get laid, your caveman brain.
Yeah, you're 4 or 5 drinks in on top of all that.
Yeah.
And it's like, whatever.
Yeah.
Only later do you realize that maybe that was like a stupid fucking thing to do. Chloe Sevigny, she's just great. I love, she has very understated, but very, like, great control of, like, her face, like, facial acting and stuff.
Yeah.
She'll tell you a whole fucking everything that's going on in her mind as this character is fucking just deluging their own fucking bullshit onto her. She won't say anything back, but she will give you these eyes that just say, all right, fucking...
Yeah.
I'm clocking your fucking particular brand of crazy, and I just don't have a thing I can do about it right now.
She almost doesn't have the emotional capability. It's less so, I think, an intentional thing of like, well, the actor is giving an intentional performance, but the character, I think, does not intentionally know how to like spouse that out, and is just kind of taking stuff in and not filtering it through like you have a fucking colander or something, or like fucking scything through sand or whatever. It's like she's just kind of taking everything in, and it takes her throughout the movie to learn that like this is good, this is not good, this is good, this is not good. But by time it reaches the end, not to skip around or whatever, to where like she has all these people telling her this stupid shit, the stupid people are the ones kicking her out of their lives.
Yeah, as they're all fucking unemployed, and she's the only one who seems to have gotten something out of this whole fucking ordeal.
You know,
she went...
whether or not that ends in like a great thing, because you end up with a narcotics officer. He's a narc, and he's a fucking dweeb, and he's one of these fucking people that I hate, that like uses mental illness as a justification for a lack of emotional maturity.
He falls in love a lot.
Well, a lot of people fall in love a lot. I'm really surprised you'd be taken in by him.
It makes me want to punch this Josh motherfucker in the face. Because everyone, you know, as they say at the beginning, it's like, nice guys cry all the time. And it's like, no, he's an asshole. He may be an asshole in a less overt way than any of these other characters, but he's an asshole. Like,
and I'm just glad that her character at least got out of it with fucking something. It's a weird position to be in, that she's still like kind of an item with him, or maybe not. They kind of leave it open-ended at the end as they're on the fucking train, but you know, she's gone through quite a lot, like you said, shit through a sieve and just catching all the good ideas. She matured emotionally, like the brute force fucking terrible way, but she managed to get there.
She learned through failure, and I would argue that the ending result isn't necessarily any better. It's just kind of like she went through this countercultural thing, and instead of learning what worked and what didn't work from that whole experience, just kind of like the whole going through the disco era, as she says, like, maybe I was thinking, you know, the traditionalism, like, era with our parents, maybe that was like the correct thing to do. It's almost like she then went the exact opposite extreme in response to doing that, which you know, that's for some people, but simultaneously I don't think that's necessarily.
And it's also in response to the fact that now she has a lifelong disease that cannot be treated, and now has affected her life forever.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden she has to find new prospects for finding company in life, and somebody who will fucking stay with her through all that sort of thing.
Which to me is, I guess, kind of this like response, less so of like the countercultural life and more so of the lack of responsibility or emotional understanding of what needed to happen for you to enter that sort of like era of life where you're being sexually promiscuous, but sexual promiscuity can also come with having safe sex.
No.
There's a whole fucking thing with that. That also just gets into the whole conversation in the 80s with Reagan and the gay community and AIDS and all this fucking...
It's not exactly like anyone is doing a lot to help teach people not to fucking...
but it's
one of those things. But in any case, you were talking about Matt Keelstar, the Josh, the depressed assistant DA. Anything else you want to say about him?
I mean, I guess sort of just the general idea that, like, this guy, he feels very much like a carryover from Metropolitan, where it feels like a sort of an almost insert of, like, that movie's original character, kind of like, this is what he would have been like during this era, however many years older, if you were to take that guy who consistently talks about how much, like, he criticizes this one, like, area or aspect of life, but he doesn't actually have any, like, knowledge of it. You know, he talks about, like, he likes the music and he likes the idea of the culture, but has not participated in the culture. Yeah. This is what I mean where someone is, like, emotionally stunted, to where they like this idea of something. They like this idea of, like, you know, if we're going to talk about something I talk about a lot on this show, it's like a lot of conservatives love the idea of the American dream.
Yeah.
And they like the idea, but then giving something like immigrants a chance to actually make it in life. All of a sudden it's, oh, we need to deport all these people, Trump put up the wall and shit like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, this guy talks about how much he likes the idea of discotheques and everything, and he likes the idea of socializing. It seems like this guy just doesn't have a social life, and he likes the idea of having friends.
Which
Means he doesn't actually like the disco culture, but he doesn't like the reality of it. And I guess I did want to bring this up, where I brought this up to you in the middle of the movie when we had it paused at one point.
Okay.
Welcome to the Basement. One of the big things that this show just blatantly steals from. One of my favorite YouTube shows. Love you, Craig and Matt. Craig in their episode on Saturday Night Fever sort of brings up this idea of, like, you know, he's like, oh, look, how about that Travolta? And then they show the dance scene of him in Fever where he's on the floor doing his solo number and everything. And he brings up, like, you know, disco just gets made fun of a lot now, which gets brought up in this movie.
Yeah.
And everything. And disco almost feels like a parody of itself. But the reason people thought disco was so cool back then is because disco was an exclusivity thing. It was what was traditionally considered sexy at the time, which is fit people who are super hot. You have to be good at the dances to, like, look good doing them.
Yeah.
You have to practice consistently, so it has to be like a big part of your life. You have to go there every fucking weekend to be able to get in. And then you have to get in, which is already this, like, outward vanity test for just being generically attractive almost.
Yeah.
So the guy, Josh, he is correct that it is an exclusivity thing, but that was kind of the whole point of the culture. It was sexy people getting involved in dancing, but then if you go back to the history of disco, it's like, okay, roots of disco were taken in funk, which were an evolution of jazz. Now, funk and jazz and everything was created into disco, and then disco was taken into gay, like, nightclubs and everything. And all that came into gay nightclubs, which was in itself a bit of appropriation, but it was appropriation by another group of people who were marginalized against.
I think
then it hit another countercultural group, right? With a bunch of these people who just like to start dancing and everything. And then you had a bunch of these cultures kind of blending together. But then once it hit mainstream white culture, that is when the beginning of the end was going to happen. When it went out of places like these small clubs in Brooklyn and made its way over into Manhattan. Like these larger areas in Manhattan. Suddenly everything just starts to crumble. Because what the fuck are we supposed to do about this? This counterculture has made its way into mainstream, but old white people are still in charge.
I mean, I could get into it. Like, have a Tony's Music Hour that may actually be a whole fucking hour.
Not if I have anything to say about it.
Really quick, before we get into all that, I like to just talk about, briefly mention, like, these movies, the way that Whit Stillman goes about making them is he bases them upon his genuine influences in the real world, right? Metropolitan, he has Metropolitan, he has a huge connection to because that was his childhood, that's the way he grew up. And this one seems to be the type of thing that was happening adjacent to him, that he would come in contact with and have some part in, in passing. He'd take girls on dates there, he'd meet up friends, and, he was there, he probably saw people and based a lot of these characters on them, and it allows him to be a little bit less personal about each person in this fucking film, right? It makes for much better characters because you make them much more flawed and feel like less, icky on the inside, but your own fucking self.
The movie does not have to insult them because they're making abhorrent decisions on screen that they insult themselves, basically.
Yeah, you can have Chris Eichman play up the fucking narcissistic cocksucker vibe the whole goddamn way, and then still come out the other end and being like, I kind of like that guy.
It's not what you think. I think I'm gay.
That's the thing about him is, like, comparing him to his character in Metropolitan, I hated his guts in that movie.
Yeah.
My hatred, like, I just don't, like, hate him, like, at all, because I just kind of look at him and I'm like, no, because, like, I know people like that, that very much it just comes down to this thing of, like, as he says, like, he is just not willing to commit. But because he's now in the 80s and the cultural norm is now committing because we've entered the era of Reagan, like, this whole fucking style just contradicts him. You know, as he says at the end of the movie, we're sort of aging out of all of this. We're getting old.
Yeah.
It's what happened to like a lot of hippies at the end of the like free love movement, and it's what happens when like counterculture is starting to exit, and then conservative become like the conservative ideas become the mainstream. Is suddenly these people who were at one point almost going with the crowd of kind of doing this idea of counterculturalism and like ostensibly like free love and doing drugs and everything, suddenly they're considered like delinquents.
Yeah, no, it's great. You get to do that sort of thing, and you get to have like an intrapersonal but like less fucking truly attached view of how the scene was in its dying fucking days.
It's like a fly on the wall sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's really fucking important, which is why I think it's about time that we launch into Tony's historical.
Get the fuck away from the mic. This is my intro. And I swear to God, it's just Tony's musical hour, and if you fucking do anything about this.
Today, the specific settings and like soundtrack and representation Stillman chose are both a bit disappointing in like weird ways, but also hugely important and revealing to the last days of disco, I think.
What makes them disappointing? I'm curious.
I'll get into that. Our cast find themselves drawn to the disco, right?
Yeah.
As it's one of these few places in which they are actually not particularly notable people, right?
No.
They're just girls in cute dresses and guys in nice shirts, whatever.
In fact, they're actively being encouraged to exit the disco.
And so so they don't really stand out. They're not like big and impressive and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of these few places where they can kind of dissolve into a crowd almost.
Mm-hmm.
The music has some level of pedigree to it. It's got great fucking jams, but it's also not the Bee Gees levels of overplayed music, right?
Yeah, because it's past the Bee Gees is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand, this movie, where it's taking place, is near the fucking standpoint where Staying Alive was in production. Yeah. Like fucking, what is it, Fever... I can't remember if that was 75 or 77.
It's 77. And this movie takes place in 79 into the 1980s.
It says the very early 80s at the beginning. So I don't think it was ever 79.
Yeah. It's got great fucking tunes. It's got Chick, it's got Diana Ross. It's got fucking, it's got the OJ's, Love Train. It's got lots of stuff that you'd expect, and all stuff that fits, because these are like the biggest name brand, or not name brand, but the biggest name like bands and tracks of the fucking day and age. Of course, they'd be playing that. In the last days of disco, they'd be playing the newest, best shit.
Yeah.
Originally, I was maybe a little bit disappointed, as this might have been like a good chance to get some more representation of like the smaller bands, the smaller numbers, some more like maybe culturally challenging tracks. There's nothing like superly aggressively pro women's sexual liberation like LaBelle, right? There's nothing like in the sense that like, they got songs like Lady Marmalade, which is a song about sex worker that only got past censors because they used fucking French to talk about sex work and shit. Soundtrack is packed with commercial hits, but not too focused on like the sexual liberation movement or like the black and Latin influences on fucking disco music and sort of thing. But I think that is by design, probably.
That's what I was going to bring up, because this idea of like, if the movie was about these things, then maybe that would make sense. But we're not only following these people in what is predominantly like, there are African American people in the club, and there are people of like different racial diversity, but we're following what is primarily a white-owned and operated club. One of our main characters is the manager of this discotheque and everything. And by the end, it gets rated for like cocaine use and everything. It's a film that ostensibly surrounds sort of the appropriators getting fucking their asses beating in. Why would they be playing sexually liberating stuff? Why wouldn't they just be playing the radio hits?
Yeah, it's one of those things where this is at the point before disco's death, where it was actually fairly fucking normal for anybody and everybody to be at a disco.
Yeah.
It was just normal.
Yeah.
You could just go there. If you were an advertiser, you might get kicked out of the big box fucking Studio 52 ones, right?
Because you're a fucking narc. That's
Discos and disco music sort of rose into prominence after Stonewall brought light to like draconian laws about same-sex dancing, which is an insane fucking thing to even think was, right? But not that insane.
Like I said, done a couple of reports on this.
Yeah. And it's one of those few safe third places originally for like the LGBT community and for fucking black people and for Latin people. This led to an environment that allowed some level of exploration of taboos in a way that didn't seem like pushed all the way down into the shadows and sort of thing.
Yeah.
Disco music actually challenged the establishment of like country and rock music, started being played on the radio, started outselling in record stores. It was like inviting straight white men and women to fucking join in the fun, and for whatever reason that didn't seem to be a problem as things just kind of rose up and rose up.
Yeah.
It just sort of became mainstream, and that seemed altogether to be like a good thing, yeah?
It's almost like when you're not stopping cultural progressivism, it just kind of happens on its own.
Yeah. Music is like food in that it brings people together, and that's one of those fucking things. So naturally, this disco music is dangerous and needs to be destroyed for the greatness of the empire. Skip to about 1979. An otherwise unremarkable Chicago disc jockey named Steve Dahl lost his job at a local radio station to make room for a block for disco tunes. He makes a whole gimmick out of hating disco and how disco sucks at his new job at a competing radio station at WLUP. Disco sucks became his like most notable contribution to society at large, right? He would frequently destroy disco records on air. He would like scratch the shit out of them, or he played big, explosion sound effects. He'd break them, and that became like part of his shtick and how he got like big. At the time, the Chicago White Sox have a promotion to boost attendance. Tickets to a ball game at Comiskey Park on June 12th for just under $1, so long as you bring a disco album for them to destroy. They were thinking maybe this would bring in a few thousand people. It packed the motherfucker all the way to the top. They think the limit at that place is like 50,000 seats. Something like 75,000 people all showed up.
Yeah.
They were trying to like crawl in through the fucking through the windows and everything. It was a whole thing. Attendance is unprecedented, right? The damage is like nationwide news as they blow up all these fucking records and destroy the fucking park in the meantime.
Yeah.
The rest was unplanned. Fans stormed out onto the field in the thousands. Disco records were hurled like frisbees. Bonfires were set. Bottles were thrown. The batting cage was torn down and destroyed. Fistfights broke out. White Sox players had to be locked in their clubhouse for their own protection. The melee lasted an hour and a half and resulted in 39 arrests and a few minor injuries. The baseball fans missed the second game. It was canceled. The White Sox lost it. It was forfeited to Detroit.
And this becomes like a rallying point. That phrase, disco sucks, becomes a rallying point for people who are like hardcore rock fans, right? All across the fucking nation. If you listen to Dahl's reasoning, the way he presented it to news outlets at the time, there's one for NPR specifically, it is very clear that the reason that he actually hated disco music was because he was a fucking raging homophobe. That's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
And he brought a lot of his fans all together in one big place to do a horrible, terrible thing live on television that was then fucking imitated in minor ways across the fucking nation. Disco sucks became like a national fucking dog whistle in a way. So now we enter the 1980s. Clubs are shutting down due to attendance dropping and are forced underground to avoid like the next disco sucks riot, right?
Also known as just getting hate crimes.
Yeah. Disco sales plummet. Music stations across the U.S. Quietly drop all disco lineups. And not long into the 1980s, everyone is convinced that disco is dead. The phrase lingers on even until this fucking very day.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the movie, our boy Josh likes to fucking talk about. It's a bit on the nose. You know, just talking about how, like, you know, people can't just remember disco for this, and this, and, you know, it's like they're just gonna think of, like, John Travolta, like, posing, which I think in itself is even a sign of, like, people forgetting what the movie Saturday Night Fever is actually about.
People will laugh about John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John, white polyester suits and platform shoes and going like this. But we had nothing to do with those things and still loved disco. Those who didn't understand will never understand. Disco was much more and much better than all that. Disco was too great and too much fun to be gone forever. It's got to come back someday. I just hope it will be in our own lifetimes.
Saturday Night Fever is about cultural bigotry, and staying within your hometown and having limited viewpoints will cause your brain to shrink and become a rapist. It's almost like this has always been about something in the first place.
And Whit Stillman just barely touches on these sorts of things by allowing there to be gay couples in the movie, by just allowing them to fucking exist, right? By giving them the tiniest bit of representation, and by just touching on the idea that maybe, just maybe, that's a little shitty what we did, and, you know, we should fucking look back on that in, you know, and not be so fucking proud of it.
Yeah.
And not say disco sucks all the time.
Yeah.
So as for to not give off Nazi vibes. And then this was the film that fucking ate shit, even though it was far more fucking technically impressive and a better movie overall, I think, than Metropolitan.
Yeah.
This is the movie that ended up eating shit. Which brings me into my final point, I think. My final main point is, Colin, why do you think this movie fucking didn't make it? I've obviously got my whole fucking rant into it. How much you agree with that is up to you, I guess.
I mean, here's the thing. You have to culturally examine. This is 98, right? America and the general view on something like homophobia say it's a bit different. It's both the same but different than it had been.
Okay.
In like the late 80s. There is almost this view of, like, how do I put this? Okay, I've explained to you the concept of the end of the 20th century and into the new millennium, end of history, correct?
I think so, if you want to, like...
End of history is ostensibly this concept that basically, by the end of the 90s, we did it.
Oh, okay.
As a species, we have conquered all major forms of bigotry, and now the future is for us to move on and create a utopia, essentially. It's very blind and idiotic to think that, you know. It's similar to the whole thing of, like, we elected President Obama, racism is over as a mindset. Like, it just doesn't actually reflect the reality, and it ignores a lot of systemic racism and systemic bigotry that just exists inherently because we live in a capitalistic society.
No.
So, while I don't think a lot of the, like, overt bigotry is as prominent by 98, I mean, Will and Grace was on TV, which in itself has its own problems because of all this, and you have a lot of, like, representation that is offensive, but it's still representation that's there.
Yeah.
That wasn't there before. But that being said, I definitely think that probably plays a contributing factor, but then I watched the trailer for this because I wanted to see if my theory I was having in the movie sort of played off in this. There are mentions of sort of the end of disco and all this kind of stuff, but no mentions of that sort of being a microcosm for thematically what the movie is saying about the people within it or the culture. There's no disco sucks shirts or anything like that throughout the film. The movie primarily kind of seems to advertise itself as sort of like a rom-com of the era, and I think what happened is something that's happened with a lot of movies. You know, Ryan Gosling's Drive had this famous thing where a woman and I think her daughter or her friend went and sued the director because you advertised this like an action movie. Instead, you gave me a stupid drama about like some dude's fucking emotional stuntedness and all this fucking... If you see Drive, you know what I'm fucking talking about. I really do think it just comes down to a combination of a studio wanting to sell it, so they lie about what it is in the marketing. Yeah. And also maybe a studio seeing that they had a loaded gun and trying to put a blank in it and make sure the director didn't notice. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I don't think the cultural reaction would have been nearly as strong, but what the fuck do I know? There are protesters that showed up to Kevin Smith's Dogma, but they were all old people.
Hail Mary, full of grace.
Organizers in Eatontown had hoped for hundreds to join them in the protest against the movie Dogma. Instead, they got less than 24, but they were joined by this man. He wouldn't admit it, but he looked and sounded suspiciously like Dogma's writer, director, co-star, and New Jersey resident, Kevin Smith.
I don't think it stands for anything positive.
What does it stand for?
I don't know, but I've been told not good.
I think a lot of it does really just have to do with marketing, and also the time was not right. I really don't think that's the case. As much as you may think that you can push for cultural change, the only time pushing for cultural change works is if you push the other people out. Oh, God. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it might be a funny thing. It might be a great thing.
Well, in any case, I think we'll just get into, Colin, have you got any, final thoughts, any last thing you want to, bring up, talk about?
I think I have a few more things I would like to talk about.
A few more things. That's great. That's awesome.
So, I don't know. Primarily, what I think is sort of the best thing about this movie, the general best part about it, is how it sort of takes traditional studio film aesthetics, and it takes the thing that they took away from us, the mid-budget studio movie, enough money to put into it to make it look pretty, as the aesthetics of a romantic comedy, and it's using it to hijack important messages, as we've already talked about. I guess primarily one of the other things I kind of want to bring up is just how much better, if I'm comparing this to Metropolitan, the acting, it's not just the craft, because the craft is so obviously improved. I almost feel like I don't
definitely.
need to bring
Camera
this up.
moves. There's
not just the camera moving. It's the basic scene to scene editing. Yeah. It's a professional studio movie, which is fucking cool and great and awesome. But man, the performances are so much fucking better. And there's a few people that the Metropolitan cast comes back. I saw the Barcelona cast comes back, which I looked into after I watched Metropolitan. This is a part of another one of those thematic trilogies, which I don't know if you watch Barcelona yet. I'll probably watch that on my own time then, unless you don't want me to.
I want you to.
Okay,
for reasons.
Cool. Okay. The Barcelona cast shows up. I know they don't really give performances like the Metropolitan people, but then the one Metropolitan actor who comes back in this, we've already talked about it. Our boy, the face of ER.
Chris Eichman.
Yeah, Chris Eichman. He's fucking great. Yeah. And he's sort of doing the same shtick, but he feels more like a real person. Yeah. Than the other movie that he's in, even though he's doing a lot of the same stuff. Yeah. In this. He feels like that's I guess kind of one of the big things I wanted to bring up is an aspect to these performances that I think works better is these don't feel like kids pretending to be adults. These feel like lost adults who don't know what the fuck they're doing. Yeah. Which sort of ties into the whole emotional maturity thing. And a lost adult who doesn't know what he's doing, well, guess what? That's just everyone. They may not be as in over their heads or whatever, but no one has life figured out. Yeah. So automatically these people end up having a much more relatable quality than a man who's trying to pose himself as an adult who knows everything.
And obviously, you said, you know about Barcelona. You know that movie was made before this one. Yeah. They've got, officially, most of these main actors have a couple of films behind them. Yeah. They've got just the rust kicked off of their acting chops. Yeah. They've learned. They have practical experience and sort of thing. You can't discount that. Yeah. Fucking Chris Eichmann's obviously great.
I did make a discovery while we were watching this that Tony wanted to bring up. I don't know if you wrote those names down. The lead actress who plays Alice, I was trying to figure out her face the entire time because I was on it.
Chloe Sevigny.
Yeah. Then I immediately, once an image entered my mind, I'm like, oh, Patrick Bateman pointed a nail gun at the back of her head in American Psycho.
I guess you could say I just want to have a meaningful relationship with someone special.
And then our fuckboy at the office who works there, who's just a weirdo, awkward piece of shit.
Departmental Dan.
Yeah, Departmental Dan shows up, and immediately I scream at Tony, "Oh, that's the gay guy from American Psycho who tries to cop a feel at Patrick Bateman in the bathroom." So there are people in this movie who would go on a couple years later to be in another movie that would not culturally be like have the impact at the time that it should have, and then eventually sort of went on to have some sort of a cult following. So I found that super interesting.
Yeah, and I already knew that Savini had some fucking experience outside of this. Little thing, the editor for this movie, between films, worked on a movie called Kids, which I still need to check out. I've heard it's very fucking controversial, great.
Tony's excited to see Kids.
Fuck you. In any case, that's where Whit Stillman was put on to her from. Was like, oh, hey, this person over here is really good. Yeah. And they fucking brought her on, and she was like, oh, she's good. Fucking, he does nothing but like talk about how great she is whenever they're on fucking, which is great, obviously. Whit Stillman, fairly down to earth for his like growing up and where he comes from and sort of thing. He's a good dude overall. Yeah. I think he's got his head screwed on straight.
Let's hope nothing bad happens.
Yeah, hopefully nothing horrific. Doesn't get like Marty O'Donnell or something crazy like that.
Halo composer turned out to be a Republican politician. That's my favorite thing in the world.
Whee! With that, I think I'm just really glad to have gotten to show you this one. I'm surprised you never got to see it. I'm glad that you know about it. I'm glad that you know about this trilogy.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it some other time here on the list. But in any case, glad you all came with us. Glad to have you around. Just thanks for watching this wonderful film with us.